Okay. In 1966, you became the executive producer of CBS Reports. Can you talk about how that came about? Was it Fred Friendly picked you?
If he was running CBS then, he did. I just don't remember how I got the job. See, there were CBS Reports and there were CBS News Specials. They were different. I guess I had done some news specials before. But I was given the job of CBS Reports. And was it? I don't know where Fred Friendly was. Anyway, I was handed the job, and I had all the facilities of CBS. I don't know how we landed on individual stories, but we can go into that.
What was the reputation of the series at that point when you came on?
Well, the reviews were really very good. I think I remember what happened. Is this after Fred Friendly was fired? That may have been it.
I had that he had chosen you as his
No,
successor.
No.
So I guess
Frank Stanton did.
Oh, okay.
Stanton and Friendly had a falling out, and Friendly just got fired. He had, I don't know, he had said something to the New York Times that the bosses correctly fired him, and I stepped into the job because I had done documentaries. And the investigative documentaries were still there. That was, we would settle on things that weren't immediately discussable on the Cronkite News. And there was a committee, and the head of it was Bill Leonard, a great guy, and he would commission or say, okay, let's look it over. And there was a period in which there would be an examination of what we could do or couldn't do, and then we'd go out shooting.
What were those decisions based on, what you could and couldn't do?
Well, we weren't going to do anything in entertainment. We weren't going to do anything which espoused exactly the one party, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. We were going to look at what needed fixing or what needed exposing in the American community. And it would just come up.
Were ratings a consideration or no?
No, ratings were not a consideration. It's strange to make They were, but we were always tucked away in some place where the ratings wouldn't be any good anyhow, if we were against a pro football game
Well, so whose mandate was it? It was just sort of a program that was a passion project, it sounds like, for some certain people at CBS, and it wasn't relative.
It was relative to what I said at the very beginning. It showed that we could operate in the public service and that the stations could not be challenged, because if you wanted that frequency, you had to show that you'd be better than Cronkite or Murrow or any of those things. So we had to do something that the people who theoretically wanted to take away the licenses and get them for themselves couldn't do. So that was the FCC justification for us.
So, whose idea was the selling of the Pentagon piece? And how did that come about? And could you talk about some of the challenges and resistance to that piece?
Well, I was part of it because of my distrust of the military. I'd been in the military for 4 years, and I was aghast at the, as I say, it was called, I call it the shilling of the Pentagon. No selling, it was shilling. And it was an institution that scared hell out of me. The United States had no right to be the king of the world, and the Pentagon's attitude was, see, if you were a lieutenant, you wanted to be a captain. If you were a captain, you wanted to be a colonel, and the way to do that was to find something to do. So there we were. And we talked about Dresden earlier. Mm-hmm. And Peter Davis was appointed to do the job. And he had one of his editors was a great admirer of Fidel Castro, for example. And I had to fire her because she wasn't being fair to, what was going on. And the Pentagon, I was the executive producer, but not the producer. Peter did it. And when it was shown, they said there were mistakes in it, and that the cutting had been incorrect. And
right.
So, yeah.
Before we get to that, though, could you just explain what the piece was about and what it was supposed to show?
Well, it showed the Pentagon selling itself, shilling, so it could ask for this great amount of money that it was getting. Mm-hmm. It had to prove that there was disaster that only the military could conquer. See, the Pentagon is always able. It's ready to fight the last war, like right now. Right now, we're ready to fight the last war, but that's not what the war is about. Why is all that equipment there? That damned F-35 that doesn't work. We put billions into it. And then they would bring businessmen in to convince them. Also, there was a business in armaments that were being sold to the Pentagon. And so we got a camera crew. Peter took a camera crew and followed these spectacles that the Pentagon would do, bringing in the businessmen, showing how important they were.
Did you have trouble getting access or clearance? Did you shoot those things? Did the Pentagon?
No, the Pentagon was all for it. After all, to them it was advertising, and they would fake things like us. At that time, where were we? In Vietnam. They would set up things for us in Vietnam to shoot, showing what they were doing.
Did they know the intention of what the bigger piece was about, though? Did they know?
No.
Did you know, or did it develop?
It developed, and I saw what it was. And as I say, I was the executive producer, not the producer. And I stayed with it as much as I could. But then after it was over, they really attacked it.
And what did they say?
That it was not only that it was prejudice, but that it had violated the laws of editing.
They said you took things out of context.
Yeah, right. And then what happened, as you know, is that Stanton got subpoenaed to defend the show before the House of Representatives.
Which had that ever happened before?
Well, I'd been subpoenaed, but not on that level. And the problem was the outtakes. The guys who wanted to tear it apart wanted the outtakes, and we weren't going to give them. That was our business, and no outtakes. And they then tried to make a law saying they had to have the outtakes. And Stanton got up and said, "I won't give them to you."
Do you recall his argument of why?
Yeah, that this was freedom of the press. That were the things that we had not published, that was up to us. And they were attacking the freedom of the press. And anyway, there's a couple of books been written about this. There's an excellent one. And Stanton faced whatever it is that the House could do to him. But he stood up, and then the House... See, he stood up to the committee, but then the House voted against the committee. And that was the end of the whole thing.
And this was almost concurrent or a little before the Pentagon Papers case, right? That was also around the same time. So maybe the timing was also turning.
What was the Pentagon Papers?
Well, that was also just revealing sources. And
but that wasn't a documentary, was it?
No. That was an actual Supreme Court case.
Yeah.
But can you talk about if they had turned over the outtakes, what do you think the result? Say they just gave them up willfully. What is your opinion on the way it was cut and how it was cut? And
no, it was all right. I had the same problem. At one point, I was subpoenaed. Mm-hmm. Now, the military was really, the government was upset. There was a movement to knock off Duvalier in Haiti. And the Coast Guard had let them through. And then I criticized the Coast Guard for that. And I was put up against a committee. And I had a lawyer at my side and all that, but the criticism of the Coast Guard bothered them a lot. So that when this other thing happened, I was labeled as a guy who was attacking the government. I wasn't. Shall I speak louder?
Oh, no, he's just raising the boom mic for you. I'm just, because we've talked to Roger Mudd and we've talked to Frank Stanton about it, and they said yes, there were yeses put in where the response was really no, and literally they were taken out of context, but the overall context was never.
That's right.
So is that how you would, in your words, how would you describe and the techniques and why it's important for an investigative report to be able to do that?
Well, there probably were some editing errors. I wasn't right on top of it. That was Peter Davis and Bill Leonard. I just don't remember it that well.
Mm-hmm. Well, what about the consequence or the repercussions of this having the House voting against the committee, and did that set a new standard? Did that?
That's right. Mm-hmm. It set the standards that the government could not ask under the First Amendment for the outtakes. That was our First Amendment privilege. Whether there were probably some minor mistakes in it, but history has shown that the Pentagon is greedy, excessive, unnecessary in its form, and what the hell are we doing in Afghanistan today?
Well, tell us how you really think.
That's exactly what I think. But I was a corporal, barely a corporal, T5. That meant that I didn't have to clean latrines, but couldn't give commands to anybody. That's what a tech fifth was.
Do you think that that has carried through to today with the respect and the integrity of allowing the press to do thorough investigating?
But it's a different game now. In television, with cable, you can do any damn thing you please. I mean, look at Fox, if I may reveal my deeper political instincts.
Well, you could. I mean, we would love your opinion about how investigative journalism has carried through to today, and where you see them doing it right, and where you see them doing it wrong.
Well, the only place where they do it, according to there was a book of standards. CBS had a book of standards after the scandals, really, the quiz show scandals. But and are those standards met? Even in the selling of the Pentagon, when I was looking at it, the cameraman had fixed views, and he would use a fisheye lens. So the nose would be sticking out and all that. I said, what the hell are you doing? That's a comment. That's a comment. And I wouldn't let him use it. But today it's totally different. That's why I watch French films.
Do you think that television is a good medium for documentaries? Do you think it's a place where they can flourish and tell a whole story?
Oh, sorry, I can't take this off.
Oh, that's all right.
I don't see many I believe in. I still believe in 60 Minutes. But it's an entertainment source. That's entertainment.
What are the most important standards and practices or ethical posts of good documentary making to you, or should be?
Well, it's to show the truth as you see it, even though the truth may be lying to you. It's non-fictional. There are no actors. And there's generally, in my mind, no music to tell you how to feel about it. No, I'll stay with news programs now. I watch the PBS News every day. They don't have much facility. And, it's the same with newspapers. How do you know what the New York Times is going to print or not going to print? And there are, there's a committee, and that's what we had. They would look at the shooting, Bill Leonard and me and Salant and all that, and see that it was whatever the word honest means. When it was honest to us, it was okay.
Mm-hmm. Do you think fondly back on the days when all of this was happening live and there was no sort of room for the manipulation? Do you think that you...
Well, no, it wasn't all live because they were shooting.
Right.
Yeah, is the close-up an editorial judgment? Is the long shot an editorial judgment? And the answer is yes. But it doesn't mean that it's unfair or just so long as you know that it is not the God's honest truth, because I'm agnostic.
With your documentaries, you've worked with other people as collaborators before. Have you ever run into any obstacles in working with someone, or with a sponsor, say, or with the producer of the
No,
movie?
I never had any sponsor trouble.
Mm-hmm. Or any kind of censorship?
Well, no, I've had people ask for corrections, but they were not. But they didn't say anything like, I look better from the right angle than from the left, or that sort of thing.
Well,
No.
No.
Yeah.
In talking about technique, you said music is a little manipulative, but
Yes.
what about narration? What about like voice of God narration in documentaries?
Well, the narration is, it should be tied to what you're seeing, but narration is, in a sense, point of view right away. You see, the narration can change the picture. You can say, well, that's that lout Jack Kennedy in the narration, and you're looking at a very handsome man.
Who are your favorite narrators to work with then?
See, I wouldn't use the word narrator, I'd say correspondent.
Okay.
And up to a point, Collingwood. My favorite, of course, was Severide. He was my hero. They had Severide in Washington and Cronkite in New York, and it was a good thing that they were that far apart.
They didn't get along.
No, it was strange. And, well, see, it also happened with Murrow. It was a very hard transition for the radio guys to television. They considered it. And I guess it was Murrow, who was mostly radio, of course, and Cronkite, and our Washington correspondent gave him a dinner, and he had Aaron Burr's pistols from the Hamilton, and he put them, they were really, made a joke of it. They were on screen, and we always had a rule, and this happens to be personal right now. If you take their picture, you inflate their brain. It's automatic.
What was so appealing to you about Severide? What made him great?
Well, mostly the way he thought. His pieces were concise, and maybe just because they coincided with mine, but he was a family friend. His first wife, I guess, died, and we both had houses on Fire Island in New York, and he brought his ladies for my wife's approval. And she didn't approve the one that fell apart anyway. And he brought to John arrowheads. He found Indian arrowheads in Minnesota, I think that's where he's from. And we were close. Of course, he had his own vanity. He wrote his memoirs at 33. But he was really brilliant. I admired him.
You did a series with him in the 70s, Conversations with Eric Severide. What were some of the most memorable interviews you did in that series?
Oh, I was just looking at one. Well, he interviewed Hutchins, the professor, and I just looked at one yesterday. Peter Ustinov playing Lord North. Lord North was the Foreign Affairs Committee for George III. And he interviewed North on the American colonies and what was going on there. And it was a funny, wonderful interview. I did 4 or 5 of them, and I can't remember the list right now.
Well, looking back now, what are some of you think your most successful documentary films that you've made that you're proudest of, or?
Well, reading the films on art that I did at PBS.
The Matisse and the Van Gogh.
Yeah, they'll stay on for a long, long time.
What about them?
Well,
Oh,
who?
just gonna pause for a second. Okay, so Perry, we're gonna just briefly touch on some of the CBS colleagues that you worked on. If you could just comment briefly about working with them personally or professionally, or if there's an anecdote you want to share with us. We'll start with Fred Friendly.
Fred Friendly was not very friendly with me. He sort of took over from Murrow, and the shows were friendly shows. I think that when he was the president, became president of CBS News, he appointed me to do the documentaries. But I never saw much of Fred. I mean, we were just different. Fred himself was looking for publicity, and that's really why he left CBS, because he gave interviews to the New York Times before he had talked to Salant, who was his boss, supposedly. And physically, I was very, very rarely with him, so he did set a bunch of good standards, but he liked the New York Times too much. Can I go on to somebody else?
Yes, Don Hewitt.
I never had much to do with Hewitt. He was 60 Minutes, and before that he was the news producer. I don't think I ever did anything for 60 Minutes. And Don was they had thought up the idea of 60 Minutes in 1968. And Bill Leonard thought that I should do it. But that was the year Martin Luther King was killed, and I was doing shows on Black history. And Hewitt got the job. And he was very good because he wanted a story. There had to be a storyline with Hewitt, and I admired him for that. I never had any social relationship with him, and barely a business one, because he was in another place.
How about Sig Nicholson?
Oh, Sig I liked a lot. He was the head of news, and I guess he took it out of radio. He was gentle, but he was reporting to somebody. I don't remember him that well. I know that I liked him and trusted him. But he was there, I think, from the exchange from radio to television. That was Sig's time. I just don't remember him that well. That's
okay.
Yeah.
You can also talk about Edward R. Murrow and also his legacy and his contribution to TV news.
Well, I didn't have much to do with Murrow. He was, of course, a great god, but I never did a documentary with him. I don't think. The only time we exchanged anything was on the Air Force's mission to Schweinfurt. Schweinfurt was the German ball bearing center, and the strategy was that if we could take out Schweinfurt, they'd stop rolling. It was all wrong because the Swedes were providing them with them. And I did a show on Schweinfurt, and Murrow was upset because it didn't include him. Well, I did that deliberately because I was there to show what the Air Force had done, and there were 2 missions on Schweinfurt, and I had deliberately selected the one that wasn't on Murrow, and his ego was upset. But I told him why I did it. I was doing a continuous story on air power, but he had been a brave man, a very brave man. And he had been in London during the bombing. He was an idol. But there were 2 Murrows. Murrow needed money. And that's why he did person to person, which violated all the standards. He'd rehearse and all that sort of thing. But he needed money. And my French friends saw a person to person. I don't know if he speaks French, but he called it personne à personne, nobody to nobody, because it had all been rehearsed. And then I don't know, am I doing this for you? We did a show give me a moment, called Harvest of Shame. Harvest of Shame was really done by a producer, and it was an extraordinary thing. It was the slavery, and Murrow presented it on the Fred Friendly series. And then Murrow left CBS to become the chief of information for the government. And the British had bought Harvest of Shame, and it reflected so badly on America that Murrow tried to stop it. But he failed. The British insisted and ran it. But I admired him very much. But he was that's what Severide said about him. He needs money. And anyway, let's go on.
Okay. William S. Paley.
Paley, yeah. Well, well, Paley asked me to help write his book. And I went up there. He lived on Fifth Avenue. You walked in, there was a great Picasso standing there, and I was to help him write the book. But he wasn't telling the truth. He just wasn't telling the truth. And he had written this, and he needed it. It was bad writing. And I remember he was at his desk, and the butler was behind him like this, and all of that stuff. And I was correcting him. And then she came in, Babe Paley, and she was a sick old lady. She had cancer. And it had been a good marriage, but there had been other women with him. And she was quite sick. And she had had diarrhea. And when that woman who'd been the model for all the great stores on Fifth Avenue and all of that, she had feces in her train, you know. He tried to take care of her. But in any case, I was unsatisfactory to him. And he got somebody else to finish it off. But he was really done in by Sally Bedell Smith's book on Paley.
What do you think will be his legacy? Or is his legacy?
Well, he tolerated a great deal. He wasn't like Sarnoff. Sarnoff was an engineer, mostly, you know. Paley was a businessman, but with good aesthetic senses. As I said before, he underwrote the Museum of Modern Art. I admired him for all the things he did, but he was out of the league for me. But he was a much better boss than the guy whose name I forgot. You told me.
Lawrence Tish.
Tish, yeah.
Yeah.
Paley wanted the news, and he wanted it clean. He stood behind CBS reports in 60 Minutes. He had too many girlfriends, but.
What about Richard Salant? Dick Salant?
Oh, I admire him a lot. I admire Salant a lot. He was great. I forget who he replaced. Maybe he replaced Mickelson, I'm not sure. But he was a lawyer, and everybody objected, saying, how could a lawyer have anything to do with the news? But it was a good thing he was a lawyer. He knew what was fair. And he protected his people. No, I liked Salant a lot. I forgot what happened to him. He was succeeded by... Who was it? The one son of a bitch who was there was... it'll come to me. Anyway.
We'll come back to that. The last one is Frank Stanton.
Yeah, Stanton I admired a great deal. Just for his standing on the selling of the Pentagon, and just for his interest in art, you know. Paley's office was elegant, very artistic and in a comfortable, elegant way. But Stanton really understood art. And, of course, he got screwed by Paley. He thought he was going to take over from Paley. And it's of a certain date, and then Paley wouldn't do it. He just set him up somewhere else and said, it's your unit now. And I would see Stanton. He got sick and he moved up to Boston. And he was so important to me that I would go up to Boston to interview him. And I think I used it in my memoirs.
What's his legacy in television?
Honesty. I don't know, television's such a mess now. It's like, I just don't watch it that much.
Let's just talk about a few more documentaries. In 1986, you produced and wrote the award-winning documentary, The Vanishing Family. Can you talk about that and why you wanted to make that piece about the welfare system?
Well, The Vanishing Family, and was shot in New Jersey by Ruth Streeter, who is one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen, and there she was in New Jersey, in the slums of it, you know. But The Vanishing Family was just that. It was the inversion of things. That is to say, in slavery days, the men were working in the fields, and the women were working in the house. It was an inversion. And that continued. The women in the black society were in charge, and they made the decisions. So The Vanishing Family was really the turning family, you know. And it was shot in New Jersey in the slums, and the police, we hired the police as a bodyguard for Ruth Streeter. She's still on 60 Minutes.
Mm-hmm. Did Bill Moyers contribute to that piece? Did you work with him on that?
Yeah, well, he was there in and out, you know, for interviews, but it was Streeter's piece, and Moyers was the face on it.
Do you think that the piece had any sort of impact on the situation in the welfare system?
Yes, it did, because it was in the Clinton administration, and the bill to change welfare was called The Vanishing Family. And Clinton saw it. So it did have some change. And you'll see that the conditions for welfare changed during the Clinton administration. They had started to change with Lyndon Johnson. And so it did have a great effect.
How did that make you feel to know that?
Well, I was glad to be part of it, of course, but I was sort of the shepherd, and I don't think I wrote anything in it. You see, they'd bring the script to me, and I would make minor changes, editorial changes. A good producer is not necessarily a good writer, and I have a background in writing, and then there's always the question of, do you need a line to be written, or does it say it on screen? You know, that's a big choice. Yeah.
Because you have written so many of your pieces and produced it, is there one you prefer over the other? Do you prefer the process of writing more than producing?
No, I don't have a preference. because I'm in this society I'm in now, I prefer my art films because they'll go on forever. And I'll tell you something different. In television, the ratings are the ratings. But when I show the art film, there's applause. And that's a lot better than ratings.
One more piece I'd love to talk about is your 1989 documentary, The Moon Above the Earth Below. And
Oh, yeah.
another one with a little bit of controversy. Do you recall that? And can you talk about...
Yeah.
what
Sure.
happened?
Yeah, I remember that. That was, what's his name? The landing. The moon
Armstrong.
Neil Armstrong's landing. And when he landed, his communication device fell apart. It didn't work. But the sponsors of the show were the people who had made the device.
It was IBM.
Yeah, IBM. And I was sent down there and they asked to cut it, and I refused to cut it, But it was a picture of America on the day we landed on the moon. That's not important anymore, The moon can go sailing away But it was a really complicated story. Von Braun, who, after all, had directed the missiles against London, was the beginning of this, too. And then I had 18 camera crews out on the day. What is America doing on the day we landed on the moon? I thought it would be like the 4th of July. It's been forgotten now. And there were some really interesting stories.
Do you recall any specifically?
Yeah, taming horses. A guy was taming horses when we landed on the moon. It's the one I remember most.
Were you with any of the crews?
No, I was.
Where were you?
I was back seeing where the hell they were because there were some live feeds coming in. After all,
Oh, so you were watching your cruise? Were you watching the moon landing at the same time?
I was watching the moon landing, but I didn't know what the crews were doing. We came in with tons and tons of footage, and then it had to be edited down. There was a sort of a rock concert going on. I forget where. Rock bands had a big audience. And the guy tried to calm him down. He said, hey, we've landed on the moon. Nobody gave a damn. And what it showed to me, and this is what people miss, this is the diversity of this country. Now you don't say anything. Let's switch to San Francisco, this, that. But when I was doing air power, they gave me a bomber. And it was an 820. And I flew it at low level all the way across America. And you just don't know how big this country is. This is an enormous country, And television reduces it, brings it to size, and it isn't. I mean, to me, we're still an unknown country. When you get on a plane, you can see Jefferson's view of America on the East Coast, and then it spreads out, and it spreads out, and it spreads out. So it's a mysterious country, and it's taking itself. People are leading it into thinking it's leading the world, but it isn't. Finita la commedia. You got anything else? Can I go away?
Just a few more questions.
God.
Really just summing up. Obviously, there's been a lot of changes to the medium of television since you first started. What do you think the biggest problems are facing the news media today?
Well, the question of editorial control. Since cable come in, there's, the Fox News is quite different than the CBS News, which I don't watch anyway. What was your question? What are
The biggest challenges facing the news, or the biggest problems that the news media faces?
Well, it's editorial control, because you can get pictures from anywhere doing anything at any time. It's so easy now with the satellites. But what is it that the American people ought to know? And that's an editorial judgment. You can't. I mean, it's obvious what the leading stories are. Right now, I follow anything that has to do with ISIS, you know. But I'm sick and tired of the Republicans and the Democrats and the stalemate in the Congress. And I'm fond of this president. But stories I don't want to see are speculations about who's going to be the next president. That's a long way away. I hope it's Hillary.
There's been so much in the news recently, just with the camera turned on the reporters themselves, like what's happened to Brian Williams. What would you say is the role of the broadcast journalist today? What should be the role?
Well, if you're talking about the guy who's on screen, Brian Williams was a damn fool. I mean, I have to stop myself from inflating my conduct in the war, but it's well known that Hitler quit when he heard I was there. What was the quote?
What should the role be of the broadcaster, of the anchor, the commentator, or whatever you call that person who's delivering the news?
Well, he's a target point, but he better make sure that the news that he has is unprejudiced, that's gone through good editorial work, and he should realize that he's the figurehead, but not the news division. That's the difference between a newspaper and a television show. You know that I read the New York Times every day, and I know it's been subjected to editorial scrutiny. And who's choosing the stories? Where should the cameras go? But the technology is so advanced that I can't answer that.
What's been your proudest career achievement?
My marriage to my wife. And
Personal, is that your career achievement? Proudest moment too?
Yeah.
Why not?
No. No single thing, just...
Do you have any career regrets?
No. I was very lucky, as I am today here. I'm an old man. I'm a sick old man, too. And Google answers a lot of questions that television doesn't have to.
True enough. Well, if you were to give advice to someone starting out in documentary filmmaking, say today, or for television news today, what have you learned that you would pass on to them that you wish you had known when you started?
Well, make sure you're not telling any lies. Make sure that your sources are correct. Don't let vanity get in the way of your reporting. and try to find another career. How about fashion?
Would you do it again? The same
Sure,
career?
absolutely, absolutely. It was wonderful. I met great people, and I had great experiences. But it's not going to be replicable because the medium has changed. I wish I'd been a better piano player.
There you go. Well, we have one last question that we ask all of our interviewees.
Yeah.
How would you like to be remembered?
As a decent fellow who wrote good poetry and had some talent. Finita la storia. I don't know how I want to be remembered. Who's remembering me?
Everyone watching this.
Okay, kids.
All right, well, thank you, Perry, so
Thank
much.
you.
We really enjoyed this time.
All right.
You are free.
Free